Hello, the Horse Race Politics podcast accompanies our forecasting website, horseracepolitics.co.uk. That's horseracepolitics.co.uk. No spaces, all one word, all lowercase. Go to the website now to join the race and predict various outcomes of the 2024 US presidential election, including the overall winner, the key swing states, and likelihoods of post-election violence. This podcast is brought to you by our partners at Focus Games and the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Research and Data, or WIZARD, as well as Swansea University. Okay, hello and welcome to the first studio episode of the Horse Race Politics Podcast 2024 edition. I'm your host, Dr. Louis Bromfield from Swansea University's Politics, Philosophy and International Relations Department, and I'm joined today by three wonderful people. The smart, savvy, suave Dr. Richard Thomas. How are you?
Professor Richard Thomas.
Professor? Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my God.
It's important to get these things right.
Professor Richard Thomas. The cool, calm and collected Alex Maas. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me once more.
No problem. And the drab, drunken, and deplorable Dr. Matthew Wall. How are you?
I am garbage.
Okay, so in today's episode, it's our final pre-election episode, and I want to focus on a couple of main themes. But before we get started, I think we need to get a bit of a highlight reel of what's happened in the US election over the last week. So I've got a few things that I've noticed. Obviously, we had Trump's Madison Square Garden rally. This was quite insane. We had the Puerto Rico comment that it is an island of floating garbage. Kamala Harris has pimp handlers. She's the Antichrist. She's the devil. The Democratic Party is full of degenerates. Elon Musk has been summoned to court over his America PAC's organization to pay out $1 million a day. Harris came out and labeled Trump a fascist. Harris gave a speech where Trump incited an insurrection, or allegedly incited an insurrection. Let's be careful. And Trump himself has filed a lawsuit against CBS for allegedly doctoring and deceiving using the Kamala Harris interview, and he's seeking a relatively minor amount of just $10 billion. So I think that's a fairly reasonable request. Are there any stories in the media that I've missed from you guys?
There's been some toing and froing, particularly on Twitter, or X as we now have to call it, where both of the campaigns are seemingly claiming that they have a big story that's just about to break, that's going to sort of end it as a contest, really. And we were chatting, Matt and I, earlier about this, and it's a bit like, well, if you've got that story, which we're rather doubtful that these things perhaps exist, but if you've got it, you need to play that card.
Yeah.
People are voting soon. If you've got a campaign ender for the other folks, now's the time to do it. So I think it just makes you wonder whether these stories actually exist, or is this just part of the sort of the wider campaign strategy. I think the other really big thing, I think, that slipped under lots of people's radar in the last day or two is Trump's Truth Social media platform, which for no sort of apparent reason that the experts can pin this to, has devalued to the degree of about 23%. He's lost 1.3 billion in terms of value almost overnight. Now, the markets can't determine why that is. However, could this be a sort of huge, drop in confidence levels in him? Are they sort of foretelling something that might be happening that we're not picking up elsewhere? So I think those are the two big things. The other thing I think that's really significant. Again, we were talking earlier about the way that women are voting in this election. The fact that lots of women have voted already is Trump's comment about I'm going to protect women whether they like it or not. Which I mean, a lot of people are wondering about the wording of that, whether that is playing to a certain narrative, which a lot of women will probably find quite unpalatable. So I think these are some quite reasonably big things that happened in the last couple of days, aren't they?
Yeah, and I mean, well, maybe just to pick up on the markets, let's say. So while the financial markets are maybe less confident in Truth Social, the betting markets, as we observed earlier in the series, have really firmed up, making Donald Trump a strong favourite. So there's a way that you can look at betting markets to turn odds into like probabilities. And so the implied probability for Donald Trump is about 65-66% to win, according to the betting markets. Now, Rory Stewart, who hosts the Rest is Politics podcast, said he'd bet £100,000 on that price. A couple of my friends have bet around £100 each on that price, which will return, about £270, including your initial stake. So there's been speculation about, given that most of the poll-based analysis is kind of has this as too close to call,
Yeah.
either whether the betting markets know something we don't know, or whether there's a sort of systematic attempt to bias them, or whether, which is my own opinion, they are just very right-wing people are more into betting. So we will see about
Especially
that.
in that kind of polymarket space, which is kind of like crypto betting platform, effectively. It has shot. I mean, we're talking like close to about $2 billion has been pumped into that on the election winner alone.
Yeah.
And that's putting Trump at about 65%. And it's like, what are these people seeing that we're not?
Yeah, and just to say, polymarket, if people are unfamiliar with that, is essentially it's a form of gambling where you buy a share, like a stock, basically, and that stock goes to $1 if your candidate wins the election, and goes to 0 if they don't.
Yeah.
So yeah, Trump is trading at like 65, 66 cents. I saw some remarkable, I think even you can, I mean, I was thinking maybe I should just put all my money into this stuff, because whatever about the result, I'm pretty confident Harris is going to win she's going to win the national vote overall. And if she does, you can, I think that's trading at 25 cents that she won't. So like you can hedge that. So you get 25% on your money basically
crazy.
overnight.
Right.
So either it comes down to either the markets are really knowledgeable or they're being systematically distorted, but that would take huge sums of money, or they're biased.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting story I've been following. The other one, which I'll return to when we talk about podcasts, is the return of Steve Bannon from his period of incarceration.
Yeah.
And his so the War Room podcast is something I'm we'll kind of look into, but he's kind of back from prison now. He's back on the podcast, and he's sort of saying, well, like, if you're not willing to go to prison for this election, you're no kind of American at all. So that to me is again it's kind of a side story in a way, but I think it might be entering the main narrative now.
It's the next January the 6th is being lined up already, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, previously people didn't tend to know what January the 6th meant in the constitutional calendar of the United States of America. Now people are pretty aware of that date. Yeah.
Awesome.
I have nothing additional to add. Yeah, I think that perhaps it'll be interesting to see how early voting numbers affect the ultimate result. I've been seeing that there's been kind of higher than expected turn-ins of early voting, at least in my home state of Michigan. I can't speak for the rest of the country. And typically, in previous years, early voting has kind of coincided with Democratic success, because there's that large narrative that Trump pushed against early voting as sort of a means of election fraud and something that people should be scrutinous of towards the security of the election. So I don't know if that's still necessarily something that's pervasive in Republicans' minds. So perhaps they are going out themselves in early voting with more frequency. But I think that when we look back, it'll be interesting to see how early voting potentially was a foreteller of the results of the election.
And just to build on that point, so I kind of, to prepare for these sessions, I get up quite early, and so I was kind of a bit sleep deprived and kind of trying to figure out what I was going to talk about. And so I put on Alan Lichtman, who's our go-to. So my sort of modeling approach is kind of follows along with his fundamentals-based modeling, but I also find it kind of soothing to listen to his podcast with his son.
Yeah.
And so he was breaking down the gender divide in early voting uptake, which is the point Richard was making, aligns with the gender divide in vote intention, to tell a pretty positive stories in states like Michigan for the Harris campaign. But you are making an interpretation of an interpretation there.
Exactly.
There's, fundamentally, you couldn't say in terms of vote registration the Democrats have a massive advantage in the early voting, but there are a lot of voters who aren't registered either way.
Yeah.
And generally women are breaking, especially in those swing states, significantly in favor of Harris, as we reviewed in our last episode. And so more women voting early is better for Harris.
I think as well, the early voting sort of fuels the pot of potential evidence that Trump might eventually sort of dredge up if he loses.
Yeah.
The more these votes are sort of hanging around in some building, unattended, or you can just hear you can hear the narrative already, can't you, about surrounding all of that, you know.
And obviously we had the kind of sight of a ballot box
On fire.
Yeah.
on fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen a kind of coordinated campaign. The number of ballot boxes that are simply existing in the US has come down dramatically. But just to your points about the numbers, as of the time of recording, we've had nearly 63 million votes cast already.
Wow.
The party divide between registered Democrats and registered Republicans, it's 41% Democrats, 40% Republicans. But the gender split, 54% women, 44% men. Okay. So effectively, that is your main story.
Unlike our podcast lineup.
100%, baby.
Yeah.
It's we're not very good with
If
representation.
we were the electorate, Trump would win.
So pivoting away, I think that's a pretty nice kind of recap of what's happened, especially as a lot of that's happened in the last 3 days.
Oh, could I just say one thing? Sorry.
Oh my goodness.
Garbage
yes.
man Trump.
Garbage man Trump.
Because
yes.
because you referenced the island of floating garbage, like joke by like comedian Tony Hinchcliffe, and Joe Biden in the way that only Joe Biden can.
Oh, yeah.
Managed to turn that easy win into a talking point for the Republican
He snatched
Party.
defeat from the jaws of victory there, didn't he?
a pseudo deplorables moment.
What a
wasn't
pro!
it?
What a pro! So that just if you're like, why is Donald Trump getting into a garbage truck? What does this mean? They're trying to kind of claim this garbage word, which was initially an insult to Puerto Ricans, to be clear, which Biden then said applied to Trump supporters.
Yep.
And they're rehashing the basket of deplorables quote from Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
And Trump is trying to like own this term and essentially troll
Yeah.
troll the Dems. I mean, I'm interested. Did you see that? How did you pick that up as an American? That image of him in the garbage truck.
If I have to be honest with you, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Wow.
I did not see this
You
at
missed
all.
the garbage truck.
Well, I feel like
I was up early, though,
I feel
to be
like
fair.
they missed the trick. I'm thinking if this is in the UK, I'm thinking how like Lib Dems do political campaigning, like the idea that you could be picking up something and putting it in the garbage truck. Try and do some visual metaphor rather than just him awkwardly climbing into a truck.
I mean,
You're missing a trick.
Well, there was a couple of things here, isn't there? The first is the physical act of him climbing into that truck attracted a lot of media scrutiny because there's a slight trip up as he was kind of
Donald Trump is a natural athlete. He's an alpha male.
about to step up into the cab. The other thing I think this could be, and this is me being slightly mischievous, but there could be a theme about dressing up going on here. I think a long time ago, I do mean a long time ago, in the 70s, there was a children's program called Mr. Ben. So Mr. Ben was a man with a bowler hat. He used to come out of his house every day, go to the dressing up shop. It was the end of his street. And he used to get shown into the back room and he used to pick a costume to dress up in and then go off through the back door and have an adventure. So we've already had Donald Trump, the McDonald's, interface worker, and now we've got Donald Trump, the garbage man.
Yeah.
And I mean, have we got any more opportunities for any more dressing up, do you think, before election day?
The election is an excuse for him.
I have to
dress up.
say
He's
Trump
happy
is
about it.
good at this stuff, though. I mean,
Agreed.
I mean, he's not. He didn't somersault into the garbage truck.
No.
But he does look like he's having fun with these things. I mean, I thought the McDonald's thing played well.
Yes, I do too.
And I think there tends to be a kind of a lens through which, like, say, people on the left see that as like kind of like cosplay would be what the modern people call it, right? Cosplay.
Yeah.
The modern people.
Well,
Right.
young people. So I'm not familiar with Mr. Ben, but I think that actually, as a campaign affectation, it plays to his strengths, and it reminds me of Boris Johnson here in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and of course it's a regular thing that we see in the UK with party leaders with high vis vests on and a hard hat on a building site thing. So he's basically doing that. But I think it's just interesting the amount of column inches and talk there was about that little misstep that he made as he was walking over to that truck. And of course, then that brings all of that. He's infirm, he's dragging his right leg, all of that sort of stuff. I'm not seeing. I mean, physically, I think he's still reasonably sort of in good shape, isn't he? I mean, the cognitive stuff is just always there in the background, isn't it?
I think Harris has this youth advantage relative to Trump, but she struggled to harness that because she's not a kind of person to get in the garbage truck and dress up. She's a serious.
Yeah,
person. She stays in that lane.
We'll come back to it, but I think the podcasting angle was her way to capitalize on that. It was her way to be like, I'm hip, I'm in with it, everyone's doing podcasts, I'm going to be in there. And Trump does Joe Rogan, and you're not really going to get a bigger platform than that. Although,
did you hear Rogan, like the conditionality? So she was scheduled to work with Rogan, but she said, well, Joe, you need to get on my campaign trail, and we'll record for an hour. He said, no, you've got to come to Austin and record for 3 hours.
Yeah.
And she said no.
There you go. I mean, you can't really blame her at this point in the campaign. Yeah, everyone's just in Pennsylvania.
I don't know.
Is that going to be a big, is that a pivotal moment? Do you think? Is that going to be, that kind of?
I think it depends on what kind of cross-cutting exposure you think a platform like Rogan has. Do you think that people are tuning into Trump's episode because they are genuinely wanting to be convinced by him, or are they tuning in because it's Trump on a podcast? Yeah,
I was going to say, that's one thing you have to consider is that I think for a lot of people, this serves more as entertainment than anything, especially when it comes to Trump. I think people might engage more with Kamala on a serious level, but when it comes to Trump, like listening to his podcast or whatever,
he's funny.
It admittedly is like a very funny person, and so I don't personally read too much into that as meaning like, oh, so many people have viewed his podcast. His podcast was very popular, therefore he's doing well. I think that many people enjoy engaging with him, and it doesn't necessarily change the way they think about him.
But could I just say though, I think I totally agree. I think this is Trump in his kind of happy place.
Yeah.
But Harris has an image problem, and a long format recording of her sort of being a person is one of the few mechanisms available to her to humanize herself.
Yeah.
And I think she would have. I mean, you couldn't find an easier interviewer than Joe Rogan, who just kind of wants you to be happy, basically, in his podcast. And I really do think I would have flown to Austin and
done it.
Yeah,
I think what's interesting here is the fact that you got Donald Trump doing a podcast. Right?
Yeah.
I think if you look at the way he's campaigned, in the past, it's all about the event, the building, the crowd, the audience, the razzmatazz, the color, all of that, the sort of, the emblems and so on. In the past, the problem has been what he said.
Yeah.
The words are tripping him up. The words are the things that are getting him into trouble. The other stuff he's very good at. He's a performer, isn't he? So it's just really interesting that he should choose a platform where all of that other stuff is stripped away.
Yeah.
And now here he is, just his words. And, the stuff that I've been reading about that podcast, or the commentary around it, suggests that was a very wise move of his, and it's paid off. And he's got some capital out of that, hasn't he?
Yeah, having seen it, it very much felt like a different side to Trump, a very underutilized side. Obviously, it's a very different format than a big rally. You don't have to be all showmanship or showmany or whatever. But his mannerisms are a bit more muted. He's a bit more, it's kind of that direct eye contact. He's not gesticulating as wildly, and he comes across quite normal, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the advantage that he has, is that no one really sees his normal. So when he is normal for 2 hours, it cuts through.
It's like a whole new dimension.
Exactly. You're like, whoa, why is everyone saying that this guy is the next Hitler or a fascist? He seems normal.
The fact that he's appearing on the podcast, which apparently was the idea of his son, Barron. Maybe, I don't know, we're perhaps reading more into this than there is, but maybe Barron Trump is thinking, this guy is not the real Donald Trump on the stage.
Yeah,
I know the guy.
The real Donald Trump is my father, and that's more likely to come across on a podcast. So, that all of that is fascinating, isn't it? The fact that he's listening to his son, who sort of up to this point has been quite a sort of distant, shadowy figure, hasn't he? Just someone that kind of gets wheeled out.
Yeah, I think.
And all of a sudden, I noticed somebody did a sort of highlight reel of how he's grown up over the last few years, and it sort of ends this very sort of gangly, uncomfortable kid who looks uncomfortable in his own skin, and then maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, here he is, this much taller guy, making these kind of signals to the crowd, and he's clearly got some confidence, doesn't he, from somewhere?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose he's Donald Trump's son. Confidence is not something that any of them are short of, is it? But,
not publicly, at least. I think I'm just interested to hear how this stuff is kind of. Do you have a sense, Alex? How is this kind of landing? So, I mean, in some senses, like a 3-hour podcast creates a lot of clips.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the kind of more Harris side, a lot of Trump's kind of gaffes have been clipped up. So where he says, "Well, I lost by," I mean, I didn't lose, right? So that clip is kind of that's been turned from long format to short format and gone around. I think a lot of what I've seen in terms of people picking it up on the Trump side is like not so much where he talks about politics at all, but where he talks about UFC, and like he does know a good bit about fighting and Vegas, and like him and Rogan. I think the term is bro out.
Yeah.
Does that sound wrong?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
They bro out on this stuff, and that's what people have taken. So I'm just curious: are your friends like sharing this stuff?
Yeah. No, I've noticed throughout the last couple of months, Trump's really made a very concerted effort to humanize himself a bit more. It was previously more his modus operandi in like previous elections to really make himself this larger than life figure, this almost like godlike figure. And I've noticed he's really been trying to push back from that a little bit. One really memorable thing for me is I'm a big fan of golf.
Yes.
So
Bryson DeChambeau.
Yes, he went on Bryson DeChambeau, like one of the world's best golfers and also a big golf YouTuber. He went on his YouTube channel and he played with him, and that was a very I think revealing thing for him to do, because it allowed him to show more of his personal side. It allowed him to show like a side of his personal life that is well documented, but he doesn't talk about a lot.
And he's a good golfer, right?
Yeah, and I would say it got let him show off that he's more than just this face, this talking head. And it showed off he was good at golf, and that was like really like that set me off a little bit. And then with the ensuing kind of taking up the occupational positions, like going to McDonald's or doing going on the garbage truck, and then going on the Joe Rogan podcast, I've noticed that he's really made this strong effort to try and humanize himself a lot more, and I do think it's working, if I'm being honest. I think that similarly to just about everything he's done, his large base of supporters really eats it up. But I do think it's helped stem the tide of harsh criticism against him to a little bit. Isn't
it amazing that here we are, we're all sitting around and we're all talking and have spent all of this time so far talking about Donald Trump.
Harris, nowhere.
You know, I mean, that is so significant, isn't it? We've said it before, you know. We said it the last time we met, which was she's got to pull something out of the hat.
Well, she's...
but maybe there's nothing in the hat.
I don't think she's that kind of politician. You know, I think what you get with Harris is kind of the kind of policy wonk, as somebody who is disciplined, is professional, turns up on time, wears kind of business type attire.
But he's disrupted all of that. So that's
people don't like those kind of politicians.
That's not the strategy to beat Donald Trump. No. And the fact that we are here spending all of this time talking about him as the notable character in this campaign is possibly one of the reasons why those markets, betting markets you're talking about, are as they are. You know?
I think, though, there was an attempt at the convention. So when she was accepting the nomination, you'll recall like the different members of her sort of family were endorsing her, were speaking to their experiences of her as a kind of leader of the family, as somebody who was very caring, very supportive, kind of a star of the family. But those voices have kind of faded from at least what comes all the way across the Atlantic to us here in Swansea.
Well, effectively, it's when you orient your campaign around negative polarization, right? It's your whole campaign is, I'm not Trump. We have to defeat Trump. And I mean, here in the UK, that's what we saw with the Labour Party. It wasn't his like a massively radical policy platform. We're just not the Tories. Vote for us to get them out. And
that was Biden.
And that,
we used to say that, didn't we, on the last
do nothing, Joe.
Exactly.
You could
if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you're winning by
sit in a cupboard for a couple of weeks and you still win, you know. But that's not been the case, and I just feel it's been such a lackluster campaign from Harris, where there's no initiative being taken, and all of the initiative is seemingly being taken by her opponent.
But could I just to put a button on it a little bit as well? One thing that struck me, so we talked in the last pod, Louis and I, about gender dynamics, and we talked at some length about the kind of policy-based appeal that Harris has developed. But I think this kind of image-building stuff that you put your finger on, Alex, it does appeal to a sort of, and this is difficult for me to talk about as a man, to be honest, but a sort of a traditional masculinity, a kind of an old school, I say what I want, I play golf, I've been married 5 times, that kind of man. is a very appealing role model, as a sort of something that a lot of men are familiar with from like being around other men and sort of want to see valorized. And I think just the flip side of Harris's appeal to female voters is Trump's appeal to male voters. I think that's what helps you understand the Bryson DeChambeau, the Joe Rogan. These are all male spaces and places, you know, to go back to what he talked about in 2016, where locker room talk is encouraged. And that is his brand. And the Harris campaign have struggled to have something for men that resonates in that way.
I think I buy that to a large degree, but which is maybe, you know, he's primarily focusing, you know, his marketing appeal, if you like, on men. But at the same time, why would you obviously try and alienate women by saying, you know, whether they want it or not? It's pretty demeaning stuff, isn't it?
I mean, there's a lot of things that from the Trump side that have been, I mean, even for him have been quite outlandish. Like whether women like it or not, I know Trump's persona and character is all quite extreme, but even for him, that was quite a lot. Like the whole rhetoric around migrants poisoning the blood of our country and the enemy within and all this stuff. Even for him, on this big stage, some things are slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, I think particularly, you know, that would have struck and resonated with people who are obviously very concerned about, you know, abortion and things like that. And, you know, this is, again, you know, I will tell women what's good for them.
Exactly.
I know better than they do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that is a problem for him. And I think that's something that maybe, you know, Harris could be exploiting with a couple of days to go.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying.
Yeah,
you know, so like a lot of her big surrogates on the campaign trail, celebrity surrogates, have been female. You know, so have been like, really high profile.
J-Lo is the latest one.
J-Lo,
isn't she?
yeah,
Madonna's cast her vote for Harris as well.
Yeah.
You know, but I think, you know, it would be better if they could align that with some content that was sort of slightly more affirming for male voters, you know, who do feel, you know, I hate to say this kind of idea of woke has gone too far is very prevalent feeling among, and especially actually in younger men.
Yeah, I was going to touch on that. I think that the whole woke has gone too far thing is very reflective of, I think, a lot of the appeal of Trump. And I think that's why when he says these very outlandish things, you know, a lot of people that are opposed to those kind of things just kind of automatically assume that everyone should be opposed to those things. And perhaps I do believe that. But there are a lot of people that they do feel this deeply rooted insecurity that, you know, maybe like there's been for many years like this big pushback against like feminism, for example, that men largely just believe that these things have gone too far and they feel encroached upon. And, you know, I don't believe that personally. I don't espouse that view, but many men do, and I don't think that the Democrats have really done a very good job of speaking to those people and saying, this is why that's not true. This is why you shouldn't believe that. This is why you should support this. This is why this actually uplifts you as well as others in society. And so I think that that's allowed Trump to kind of enter and say, I hear you, and I'm going to acknowledge you, and yeah, I think that's why he gets all that support.
There's a point to be made for this strategy of negative polarization, of vote for me. I don't need to have a radical policy platform, because if we take a look at like the hit list that Trump has, I mean, we're talking being found guilty in a civil court, found liable in a civil court of defamation and sexual assault. He is a convicted felon. He's been impeached twice. He's got cases in New York about allegations of the valuations of his buildings. He allegedly on all of this, incited an insurrection where a gallows was constructed to try and hang Mike Pence, right? He's using Nazi rhetoric. He's dehumanizing people, poisoning the blood of our country, wants to deport 10 to 15 million people, massively underplayed the threat of COVID, which no doubt exacerbated the health threat, is fundamentally undermining American democracy. Said he would be a dictator, but just for one day, because we're reasonable here.
But have you seen his golf swing? The guy can
But he's
hit
got a golf swing,
yeah,
you know?
I mean,
But I think...
nice little fade on it, like...
But here's the main crux of it is that I think on an issue like Gaza, Harris is being beaten over the head with this, and I mean, I personally agree, but like, she's being beaten over the head with this relentlessly when Trump's position on that topic is effectively the same, and yet he has this massive list of things that he's done, allegedly.
I mean, Trump is more pro-Israel
Yeah.
than Harris.
But it's like, it feels like, I think there was a good quote from CNN where they basically said it feels like they're taking two different tests, right? Harris has to be perfect. All of these things that are wrong with Trump are just baked into his image. And like, I guess my question is how the hell do you do that? How the hell do you bake in so many wrong things with your image that people just give you a free pass?
But it's not happened suddenly, has it? You know, we've been led down this road for a long time, haven't we?
Yeah.
Because incrementally, there's the next thing that he's done, the next thing, and suddenly, you know, those things don't appear to matter. You know, I'm thinking particularly about the last campaign. Some of the things that he said, particularly about women, you know, those things clearly, didn't really hit as hard as they might have. Some of the things that he said this time, or have been said and he's endorsed. Well, here we are. We're talking about this could go either way. This race. I mean, if you apply the logic of common sense, this election should have been over a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it isn't. So I mean, those things. It's a really good point. It's just those things don't seem to matter anymore, do they?
Yeah.
They,
and I think, well,
they just don't carry any weight anymore.
No, and I think your point is actually bang on the money. I mean, if we think about one of the first things that he said in 2015 about Mexicans bringing crime, they're rapists, all of this stuff, and now all of a sudden it's like, that's the baseline. Within one speech. And like, I'm thinking about trying to think of UK equivalents, right? I'm thinking about that.
Boris Johnson,
yeah. Well, I'm thinking about the most recent example would be that reform candidate who was alleging that we should just put the army or whatever on the cliffs and just shoot people coming in on small boats. And it's like, that's huge. That's game changing, right? It's like, okay, well, maybe that's priced into the reform imagery, but it's like, we can't tolerate that. The US, the first thing he does is accuse Mexicans of being criminals, and some are okay. And now he might be president for the second time.
There's a very good... so back after 2016, I was trying to make sense of everything. And there's a guy called Matt Taibbi, who's a Rolling Stone journalist. And he did a sort of Hunter S. Thompson-style campaign trail. It's called Insane Clown President, the book. And he just talks about how he is daily going to events where Trump is saying stuff that would cancel any other candidate. And I think he calls it like there was a kind of a shame cycle. So a candidate would make a kind of a slip that would create a kind of furore. They'd have to apologize, and after that, their kind of political life is over.
Done, yeah.
And he's like, Trump just never apologized. And I think he speaks to something in people that is quite primal and is fun. If you ask me, and this is just my opinion, it is fundamentally irrational.
Yeah.
Because that's where I keep coming back to men or women. Like, do you know what we all like? Bit of money in the pocket.
Yeah.
Right? Economic growth, solid. So, like, if you're a man, I don't mind if somebody asks me to use pronouns. I'm very happy to do that. If I don't have money in my bank account, I'm struggling.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't see why
Is the economy
Harris isn't
stupid?
just saying, like, isn't just going around in a dollar bill T-shirt and being like, I am money for you.
Yeah.
Men, women, black, white, money.
He is nothing. As you know, I'm definitely not a Donald Trump fan, but he is nothing if he's not resilient. I mean, if you consider that after all of that, that charge sheet that you just read out, and you probably could have made that 3 times as long.
Yeah.
That could be the whole podcast.
8 years this man has been the central figure in American politics. From the time that he announced that he was running to be president, and he won the election, and then he's had a period out. But his profile's never dropped. He's still in there, and as you rightly just say, he could be the next president. This time next week we could be sitting here poring over where did it all go right for him and where did it go wrong for Harris. So, as much as he is obnoxious, he is abhorrent, you have to, in some way, grudgingly admire his resilience as somebody that is a survivor and is able to kind of coat himself in Teflon. I mean, whatever that man has, like get
Teflon.
Get it on the frying pans, because nothing sticks, does it?
Well, he is a man. He's a white guy, a rich white guy. You can get away with a lot.
Yeah. Jeez. Well, election in 4 days. Anyone dare to make any predictions? Man, I will say this on the Horse Race Politics website. I know we were talking about the kind of the betting markets, but as it stands, our users on Horse Race Politics are putting Trump at about 39%. So a much different perspective to the markets. But then you're betting on using points and reputation rather than money. So maybe there's a different
and
dynamic.
you're looking at people in Swansea University predominantly as our people making
It might be a bit of a bias sample.
We have less skin in the game.
I mean, we're in the Keir Starmer building right now, or not the Keir Starmer, the Keir Hardy building.
Hardy. Maybe you should rename it.
Keir Hardy founded the Labour Party, so that tells you a little bit about where we are.
I'm never going to call it the Keir Hardy building ever again after that.
The Keir Starmer building.
Does anybody? How confident are you feeling?
I think I'm still choosing to believe that that Harris will edge it, but I underline and write in large font in red, edge, the word edge. I think she's going to edge it.
Matt?
Okay, so I think I've rehearsed my bullish Harris position in previous podcasts. Based on the fundamentals. I'm also very bullish, and these things are related, on the election violence markets. So I see a very high probability of at least one death before November 11th that can be directly attributed to protests, riots, attempts to interrupt the count. I foresee, to the extent that it's close at all, which I think it will be, as Richard said, so part of my prep for this, and I've been listening to it across the last few months, is the War Room podcast by Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon was an advisor to Trump. They are kind of not Trump affiliated, but Trump aligned. So there's been a huge strategy of taking over the Republican Party from the ground up, the precinct strategy.
Yes.
You have people in precincts all over the states who think that the 2020 election was like systematically rigged against Trump, who are ultimately relying on them to certify at those levels. I think the minute that Trump isn't winning by a huge margin, the count is going to fall into a really difficult state of affairs. I mean, I was looking at some coverage from America. There's snipers on the buildings of some where they're counting the ballots. Like the security,
it's crazy,
is insane. And like I would say, like here in the UK, I have my issues with the previous government, but Rishi Sunak was never saying I won't accept the result.
Losers' consent, all of this.
We don't have losers' consent. It's like, I think on our market about will both candidates have accepted the result by 11th of November. That's down at something like 15% likelihood.
Yep. Extraordinarily low. Oh yeah, like, so you're thinking that there's a high likelihood of post-election violence much sooner than January 6th?
Much sooner? I don't think so. I would like to believe that the nation is a bit more ready to accept any result. I have not noticed as much bitter vitriol going back and forth. Granted, I haven't actually been there in the better part of 2 months now. So maybe if I were there, I would be seeing it more forward. But I noticed, just on my personal perception, it seems like the intense bitter vitriol that led to actual acts of violence was more pronounced in 2020 than it is today. And I think that people have realized that despite our disagreements, that is not good. That is not what we need to be doing as a nation. And I think that there's become a bit more of a consensus among more people that even in the most bitter of disagreements, that's not the way to resolve things. And I think that January 6th kind of opened a lot of people's eyes to that as well. Now, with that being said, on previous podcasts, I was more confident in my stance on Harris. I don't want to completely go back on that the other way, but I kind of want to go back on it as far as being confident goes, because I mean, I believe she will win the popular vote by a very wide margin, but just the nature of the U.S. election, obviously that's a bit unimportant as it is. And when I look at the actual electoral map, I see so many very, very feasible routes that Trump wins.
Especially if he gets Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah, I was going to say Pennsylvania is looking absolutely nail-biting right now.
But it's drifting Trump.
Yeah. And I was going to say, it almost seems like he's likely to get it at this point, and that would be really devastating to the Harris campaign. And I wouldn't say, I just have to speak to my honest feelings. I would not say I feel confident Trump's going to win, but I'd almost have to give him the edge right now. I really wish I didn't have to say that, but
they've got the momentum though, don't they?
Yes, they do.
They do have the momentum, I suppose. Yeah, let's hope. This is a really trite twee thing to say. Let's hope democracy is the winner.
Yeah.
It nearly lost big time last time. So
I mean, democracy. I should say, it is a personal opinion, but it is a good thing.
yeah, I kind of like having a say.
Yeah, it's probably better to live in a democracy than not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And so that's the insight that you get if you come and study politics here at Swansea
Democracy's
University.
all right.
Democracy is okay.
It could be. It could be better. It could be worse.
So it took me a long time to learn that, but eventually.
Ringing endorsement from the head of politics at Swansea University. Okay, well, thank you very much, gents. That concludes our first studio episode of the Horse Race Politics podcast. Don't forget that this podcast accompanies our forecasting website, horseracepolitics.co.uk. You can go to the website, join the race, and predict various outcomes of the 2024 US election from the winner, as we've just discussed, key swing states, as we also just discussed, and likelihoods of post-election violence, which, lo and behold, we also just discussed.
And just to say, if you get it right, you can beat your friends. You get better points than
we
your
do
friends.
have scoring, we have
leaderboards.
leaderboards, we have, I'm currently like 9 points behind Matt, but that will change. I lull him into a false sense of security before I destroy him on election night. So special thanks go to my 3 favorite people in the whole world, literally my favorite people, and our partners at Focus Games and the Wales Institute of Social and Economic Research and Data, or WIZARD, and Swansea University. That is us saying farewell before perhaps the most important election of our lifetimes. The next time you hear from us may well be on election night or just afterwards, kind of breaking everything down. We might be a bit tired, and we'll soon discover the next president of the United States of America. But one thing's for certain, we will be here covering it all. Thank you. See you next time.